Can I get a quick show of hands? How many people have tried Mac development in this room? Cool. It's interesting you're all up at the front. I recently made the switch. I'm going to talk about that today. And I want to talk a little bit about my experience and just hear some stuff that I wish I had heard from somebody else a while ago. So let's get started. This is a little bit about me. Been an iOS developer for over 9 years. Up until a few months ago, I had zero experience doing anything Mac. I never touched it, and it always seemed a little scary. Got a quote here. It's not about standing still and becoming safe. If anybody wants to keep creating, they have to be about change. Miles Davis. So let's talk about change. And the stuff that's also the same, because that context is important. So from going from iOS to Mac, there's a few things that are comfortable and the same. You're still using Xcode. You're still using Swift, unless you're using Objective-C, which is also something that's the same. Swift UI, mostly the same. Core frameworks, a lot of the same stuff. There's some mild differences in certain things. And then Apple documentation is just great on both sides. I found moving was from iOS to Mac development, with these things being the same, was actually fairly comfortable. As far as what I noticed was different right off the bat. UIKit versus AppKit is probably the biggest one that I ran into. Between UIKit and AppKit, there's a lot of similarities. Typically, if there's a UI something, there's an NS something that's the same thing, but for Mac, and looks a little different, and has a couple different properties. Typically, you can find stuff that does about the same thing. I find myself, just like when I began iOS development, I find myself turning to Apple documentation all the time for this kind of stuff, just because names are different, and finding the pieces that do what I need to do are there. Screen sizes. You can fit a whole lot more on a Mac screen. I find that's really nice. You put a ton more there. Give the user a lot more to look at all at once. User interface design on iOS, you're always thinking about, touch controls. Typically, you want to support just like one thumb or two, depending on what your app is, and you don't have very complex controls that way. Where Mac, you can expect the user to have a keyboard, a trackpad, and a mouse. And while you could have those things on iOS, they're not standard. It's typically, people connect that to an iPad sometimes, but not always. So I actually ran into something when I was building out a view on the Mac app I'm working on. We had a list where you could select rows and delete them. And I thought, okay, we'll select it, right-click it, and delete. I didn't even think about the delete button on the keyboard until my code review went through. And somebody called that out, and I went and implemented that. That didn't even cross my mind, because it's not something I'd ever thought about when building iOS apps. There's platform-specific APIs. On iOS, you have core haptics and stuff, and you can deal with the accelerometers and stuff like that, do real fun stuff there. On Mac, you don't have that. But on Mac, you also have all this AppKit stuff for menu management, window management, that you're not going to be worrying about on iOS. Big difference. Battery size, processing power, stuff like that. A lot of the times you can expect a Mac user to be plugged in. You should always keep in mind, though, that MacBooks, you can take those on the go as well. But just because of the sheer power of the device, you can do a lot more powerful stuff. In my iOS development, almost always it was call an API, have a server do something for you, and return it. Partially for the sake of simplicity and having multiple devices supported on a single system, but partially also because doing that processing on iPhone just kills your battery. That can be kind of painful sometimes, but on Mac you can kind of do a lot more of that on device, and do a lot more of that processing, just because you have the resources to do it. And then the last difference, this is one I really enjoyed. The difference between running on a separate device and running on the same machine as Xcode, I didn't think that would be as nice as it is. Where iPhone, you know, quick run, you have to like look over here and wait. Mac, you can like quick run, still keep working on your Xcode and stuff, and it just pops up right in front of you. You don't have to context switch or look around. I just found that to be really nice. My conclusion from all this is the transition was easier than I thought it would be, and you should give it a try if you haven't already. It's basically the same thing, and I wish I'd known that before. I would have probably dove into Mac development a lot sooner. That's all. Does anybody have any questions?